At the age of 32, I found myself thrust into a reality few could ever imagine, becoming the unseen majority owner of a multi-million-dollar tech company. My name is Samantha Harlow, and this is the story of how a combination of love, legacy, and instinct saved me from losing everything. When my grandfather passed away, I inherited control of Harlow Technologies, a company worth over $25 million, 0 cents. But the real turning point came when I met Jason Miller. I fell for him faster than I ever thought possible, but a quiet voice inside me warned, keep your fortune private, at least until after the vows. Less than 24 hours after our wedding vows were exchanged, as we were just settling into married life, a knock at the door changed everything. There stood my new mother-in-law, Eleanor Miller, flanked by a notary public and armed with legal documents. Her demand? I immediately transfer ownership of all my personal and business assets. She was calm, prepared, and chillingly confident. If you've ever experienced betrayal, you'll understand the weight of that moment. If not, buckle up. Because this wasn't just a test of trust. It was the opening move in a ruthless scheme to take everything from me. The roots of this story begin long before I met Jason, back in the early days of Harlow Technologies. My grandfather, Walter Harlow, was a trailblazer in the world of software. In 1975, long before Silicon Valley became a buzzword, he launched his company from the cramped confines of his garage. Over the years, that humble operation grew into a respected mid-size firm, specializing in security software, socialistic software, and security software. While other kids my age were learning to ride bikes or trade baseball cards, I was absorbing business strategy at the dinner table. Sammy, Grandpa Walt would say as he reclined in his creaky leather chair, trust is earned, not given, and money has a funny way of turning friends into strangers. Those words stuck with me. Each summer, starting when I was just 13, I worked at the company, first sorting mail, then fielding customer calls, and eventually managing small marketing projects. By the time I completed my MBA, I didn't just understand the company, I was part of its DNA. My biggest contribution came when I proposed a strategic pivot toward cybersecurity. With rising global threats, it was a move that paid off handsomely, doubling our annual revenue within 3 years. But the celebration was short-lived. My grandfather was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and passed away not long after. Losing him felt like losing my compass. The company's success suddenly felt like a lonely mountaintop without him by my side. At the reading of his will, emotions ran high. I was stunned to learn that he had left me a 75% ownership stake in Harlow Technologies. The remainder was distributed among the firm's earliest and most loyal employees, people he trusted deeply. Later, in a quiet moment, his lawyer Frank Thompson pulled me aside. Your grandfather saw in you the perfect blend of logic and compassion, he said. You always believed you were the future of this company. Taking on the role of CEO felt overwhelming, but I channeled my sorrow into the mission of preserving and expanding his legacy. I made conscious choices to live below my means. I rented a modest but stylish loft downtown, drove a 3-year-old Audi, and avoided the trappings of obvious wealth. I upheld Grandpa Walt's legacy of anonymous giving, funding educational and health initiatives without putting my name on any building. It was during one of these quiet philanthropic events, a charity gala for childhood literacy, that I first met Jason. I had just finished admiring a series of student art pieces when a tall man with kind amber-hued eyes struck up a conversation. Beautiful, aren't they? He asked, gesturing to a vivid painting of a city skyline. One of my 4th graders made that. I teach at Lincoln Elementary. His name was Jason Miller. At 34, he was gentle, never married, and deeply passionate about education. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and radiated a warmth that made me instantly comfortable. When he asked what I did, I offered my go-to response. I manage investments for a tech firm. Not a lie, but a carefully curated sliver of the truth. We had our first date over coffee at a local cafe. He insisted on paying despite my polite resistance. Our second date was a long, soul-bearing hike through Morton Nature Preserve. We talked about everything: childhood dreams, favorite books, and the families that shaped us. Jason told me he was raised by a single mother after his father walked out when he was 10. My mom sacrificed everything, he said, as we watched the sun dip behind the trees. She juggled 2 jobs to put me through college. We've always been each other's world. That kind of loyalty hit close to home. My grandfather had preached family above all else. By our 5th date, my heart was no longer mine. 3 months in, Jason invited me to meet his mother over Sunday dinner. Wanting to keep things simple, I wore casual jeans, a cozy sweater, and minimal jewelry. Eleanor Miller's home was a pristine 2-bedroom in the suburbs, decorated meticulously, with plastic-covered couches and framed family photos lining every wall. She greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Jason's told me so much about you," she said, scanning me from head to toe. "He mentioned you work in investments. Must be a comfortable living." I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "It's more about sustainable growth than flashy returns." Throughout the meal, Eleanor peppered me with personal questions about my upbringing, my income, even whether I owned or rented my place. Jason grew visibly uneasy. "Mom, this isn't an interview," he finally said when she pressed too hard. "I'm just learning about the woman who's captured my son's heart," she replied, her smile stiff. It was a strange encounter, but not enough to shake my growing affection for Jason. As time passed, our relationship deepened. Jason's love for his students and his dedication to nurturing young minds reminded me so much of Grandpa Walt's mentorship. 8 months into our relationship, Jason whisked me away for a beachside weekend escape. On our final evening, we strolled along the shoreline, the sky ablaze in shades of coral and gold. Without warning, he dropped to one knee and opened a velvet box containing a modest yet beautiful diamond ring. The waves whispered behind us as he asked me to be his wife. Despite the beauty of the moment, I hesitated, just briefly. I thought of my grandfather's advice, his voice echoing in my mind. "Always protect your heart and your assets." I said yes, of course, but deep down I knew I couldn't let my guard down completely. Not yet. I would marry Jason with my whole heart, but not my checkbook. That caution, as it turned out, would be the only thing that saved me from complete devastation. The night of the proposal, we celebrated with wine and laughter under the stars, and for a while everything felt perfect. But in the days that followed, my instincts kept tugging at me. Softly at first, then louder. It wasn't Jason who concerned me, it was the subtle hints from Eleanor. The way her questions danced just a little too close to financial curiosity. I began taking mental notes, watching patterns and noticing how Jason never pushed for details about my work or income, but always accepted my vagueness with too much ease. I went ahead with the wedding planning, carefully keeping my business ties and wealth tightly under wraps. My legal team helped me secure prenups, asset protections, and confidential trusts, precautions that felt paranoid at times, but I followed through nonetheless. I told myself it was just smart business practice. I didn't want to believe that anyone I loved could have ulterior motives. Our wedding day was beautiful, a small intimate ceremony on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, surrounded by close friends and just a handful of family. Jason cried during his vows, and so did I. At that moment, every wall I had built came crashing down, or so I thought. But the very next morning, the illusion shattered. That knock at the door, the papers Eleanor carried, the smugness in her tone as she presented them all confirmed my worst fears. The betrayal wasn't just calculated, it was premeditated. She thought she'd cornered me, that she and Jason had secured a fortune. But what they didn't realize was that the fortune they were after was locked behind layers of legal safeguards they could never touch. And that was just the beginning of the battle I was about to wage. "Sam, I know this might feel sudden," Jason began, his voice laced with nervous energy as he held my hands gently in his. "But when you know, you just know. I want to build something real with you, a life, a home, a future. Will you marry me?" For a moment, everything stopped. My grandfather's warnings echoed like distant thunder in my mind. Protect yourself, not everyone has good intentions. But Jason's eyes, so vulnerable and filled with hope, held me there. I saw no calculation, only genuine love. I took a deep breath, the storm inside me momentarily silenced. "Yes," I whispered, tears brimming. "Yes, I will." That night, as we celebrated with candlelight and laughter, I came close to telling him everything. The truth about Harlow Technologies, the value of my estate, and the legacy I had inherited. The confession perched on the edge of my tongue, trembling to escape. But something, an unshakable gut feeling, urged restraint. It wasn't distrust, not exactly. It was caution, finely tuned by years of wisdom passed down from a man who'd seen the best and worst of human nature. I told myself I would share the truth soon, once we were husband and wife, once it wouldn't matter. I didn't realize how pivotal that choice would become. As soon as our engagement went public, Eleanor transformed from Jason's supportive mother to a self-appointed wedding czar. My vision of a small, heartfelt ceremony was quickly overshadowed by her grand designs and relentless opinions. "Not the downtown garden," she scoffed. "The Westlake Country Club has better parking and prestige. It might be pricey, but I'm sure your job pays plenty." Every comment, every suggestion, came wrapped in a thin layer of financial implication. She never asked directly, but her curiosity hung in the air like humidity. During a Sunday brunch, while Jason was up fetching more coffee, Eleanor leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "So, have you two discussed merging finances?" she asked casually, but her eyes were sharp, scanning my expression for any giveaway. "We're still figuring things out," I answered smoothly. "We both value financial independence." Eleanor's smile twitched. "Independence is for people who live alone, dear. Marriage is about unity. No secrets, especially when it comes to money." Her words pricked at me, but I nodded politely, unwilling to provoke a confrontation. Still, the red flags were piling up faster than I could process them. A week later, I stopped by Jason's apartment while he was at work to drop off signed documents for our marriage license. Eleanor was there too. She had a key, something I hadn't known and would definitely address after the wedding. She claimed she was just delivering a homemade casserole. But when I walked into the apartment, I found her in Jason's small home office, standing over his desk, sorting through a neat stack of papers. My papers. Documents I had left in a labeled folder. Investment records, personal account summaries. Nothing to do with the company, but private nonetheless. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh, I was just dusting and must have knocked these over," she said, hurriedly rearranging the pages. I didn't respond. I simply stared, imprinting every detail into my memory. I couldn't prove anything, but I no longer doubted my instincts. I left that day with a quiet resolution: no more careless oversights. 2 weeks passed, and then I heard the conversation that would chill me to the bone. I arrived early to Jason's apartment, arms full of groceries, about to knock, when I heard voices from inside. Tense, raised. "Mom, you need to stop. Sam and I will handle our finances, our way," Jason said, clearly frustrated. "I'm just thinking of your future," Eleanor replied, her voice tight. "You've struggled with debt for years. She's obviously doing well. Marriage is about sharing. Her money becomes family money." "That's not why I'm marrying her," Jason said firmly. "Of course not, sweetheart," Eleanor said in a softer tone. "But it wouldn't hurt to talk to her about joint accounts. Once it's legal, you'll both be protected." I stood frozen, every cell in my body alert. Protected? From what? I stepped away before they knew I was there, my heart thudding. Was Jason being manipulated by his mother, or was he complicit? Either way, I couldn't afford to take risks. That night, I called Katie Lawrence, my oldest friend and most trusted confidant. "I feel like I'm being paranoid," I told her, recounting Eleanor's words, the wedding meddling, and the incident in the home office. "You're not paranoid," Katie said without hesitation. "You're smart. Eleanor's looking at you like a financial windfall, and Jason? Maybe he's caught in the middle, maybe not. But you need to protect yourself." "I haven't told him about the company yet," I admitted. "Good. Don't. Not until you know you can trust him with everything." The next morning, I called Frank Thompson, my grandfather's longtime attorney and my advisor ever since I assumed control of Harlow Technologies. "I want to ensure all my assets are secure before the wedding," I said, "especially the company." Frank didn't hesitate. "Your grandfather would command your foresight," he said. "Many people let love blind them to financial realities. Together, we put in motion a network of protections. An irrevocable trust to shield my shares in Harlow Technologies. Layers of legal insulation around every financial asset, and a prenuptial agreement draft that I hadn't yet decided whether to use. If anyone, even a spouse, tried to access my business interests, they would face a wall of legal resistance." "This feels deceptive," I confessed during one of our meetings. "Shouldn't marriage be built on trust?" "Trust is earned," Frank replied gently. "Your grandfather didn't share every business secret with your grandmother until they'd been married a decade. You're not betraying trust. You're safeguarding legacy." As the wedding neared, my anxiety climbed. Eleanor's casual comments grew bolder. At family gatherings, she dropped little nuggets. "Jason's marrying someone with such great business ties." Or, "It's nice to have security in the family again." Each one reminded me that this wasn't just a wedding, it was a test. The night before our wedding, I lay in bed alone, as tradition dictated, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. Not my love for Jason, that was real, but the secret I was carrying. The weight of a $25,600,000 0-cents company sat between us, unspoken. It shadowed the joy I should have been feeling. Still, I held on to my plan. After the ceremony, once we were officially husband and wife, I would tell him. I had to. But only if I felt it was safe. Only if I believed he truly loved me for who I was, and not for the empire he didn't yet know I controlled. That night, as I stared into the darkness, I thought about my grandfather's legacy. Not just the company, but the values he lived by. He had built Harlow Technologies from nothing, brick by digital brick, guided by resilience, intellect, and a heart that believed in empowering others. He had chosen me, not a board, not a hired CEO, to inherit that legacy. That responsibility weighed more than the net worth ever could. I thought about the look in Eleanor's eyes when she spoke of finances and the way she clung to control like it was a lifeline. I considered Jason's love, sincere it seemed, but shadowed by the influence of a woman who had shaped his every major decision. I loved him, but love alone was not armor, not in this world, not when fortunes and power were involved. I picked up my phone and reread the draft of the prenuptial agreement Frank had sent me. The language was strong, direct, and protective. It wasn't romantic, but it was necessary. I thought about the future I wanted, not just love, but respect, not just partnership, but honesty. If Jason truly was the man I believed him to be, he would understand. And if he didn't, then I would know, and that truth would be more valuable than any vow. I told myself that once Jason and I were officially married, I would find the right moment to share everything, the truth about Harlow Technologies, the extent of my wealth, and the real reason I had kept it hidden. But while I was carefully planning when to open that door, Eleanor was already working on hers. Our wedding morning arrived, bathed in golden September sunlight. The sky stretched clear and blue above, and a cool breeze tugged at the amber and rust-colored decorations we'd chosen. It was the kind of day brides dream about. I wore a gown that was timeless, elegant but not extravagant, a soft ivory silk with lace detailing and a flowing skirt. I had chosen it deliberately, despite Eleanor's repeated pressure to dress the part of someone in my financial position. Her suggestions leaned toward couture and spectacle, things that never felt like me. The ceremony was set for 4:00 p.m. at Riverside Gardens, a quiet, picturesque outdoor venue by the riverbank, affordable enough that no one would question it for a teacher's budget, yet charming enough to feel special. Jason and I had agreed to split the wedding costs evenly, though the truth was, I had anonymously covered most of it through a discreet arrangement with our planner. The planner, sworn to confidentiality, ensured no detail betrayed the reality of my financial contribution. Katie arrived at my hotel suite early, bearing chilled champagne and her usual brand of blunt but loving support. "You're radiant," she said, watching the makeup artist apply finishing touches. "Are you ready?" I stared at my reflection, heart fluttering like the veil draped across the back of my chair. I love him, that much I know. Everything else? We'll navigate together. Katie raised an eyebrow. "Have you decided when you'll tell him about the company?" I nodded. "During the honeymoon. We're going to Lakeview Resort. It's quiet, private, no distractions. I want to be honest with him. I want to tell him everything. Why I waited, what it all means." Katie reached for my hand. "I still believe Jason loves you. It's his mother I don't trust as far as I could throw her." "She'll be my mother-in-law in a few hours," I said with a half-hearted laugh. "I need to find a way to live with that." "Good luck," Katie muttered, clinking her glass against mine. "To survive the Miller dynasty." At the venue, everything looked like a dream. Wildflowers framed the aisle, strung lanterns swayed gently from shepherd's hooks, and rows of white chairs lined up before a floral arch. Guests began arriving in steady waves. Close friends from my side, Jason's fellow teachers, and extended family from both camps. Then Eleanor arrived. She wore beige, technically inoffensive but somehow styled to draw attention. Her dress shimmered faintly in the light, a perfect blend of wealth and restraint, as though she were silently reminding everyone of her dignity and suffering. She walked the grounds with the air of a headmistress, inspecting floral arrangements and place cards as if auditioning for the role of wedding critic. Eventually, she appeared in the bridal suite. "Samantha, darling," she said with those familiar air kisses. "What a sweet little ceremony you've arranged. Understated elegance, I suppose, though I still say the country club would have been the better investment." "This feels right for us," I said, careful to sound kind but firm. She nodded slowly. "Of course. What matters is that after today, we'll all be one family." Her eyes gleamed. "And families share everything, don't they? Joy, burdens, resources." Before I could form a reply, my coordinator stepped in to announce it was time. Eleanor squeezed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'm so pleased Jason is marrying someone successful. He deserves every opportunity after what he's been through." And with that veiled jab, cloaked as concern, she swept out of the room. Katie leaned in seconds later. "What did the Wicked Witch want?" "To remind me that family shares everything," I whispered. Including your bank account, apparently, Katie muttered. Let's get you married before she files paperwork to become your co-signer. Despite everything, the ceremony was beautiful. When I walked down the aisle, Jason's eyes met mine, and they were filled with tenderness. His voice quavered as he recited his vows. Samantha, you walked into my life and changed it forever. I promise to stand beside you, to support your dreams, to love you without condition or end. In that moment, I believed him. Whatever games Eleanor might be playing, Jason's love felt genuine, and that hope carried me through the day. During our first dance, as the soft music wrapped around us, I felt the secret burning in my chest. Jason, I began, heart racing, I need to tell you something important. He looked at me, brows raised gently. What is it? Before I could continue, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. My uncle stepped in, kind, warm, a stand-in for the father I lost years ago. The moment passed, and the truth remained sealed for another night. Throughout the reception, I noticed Eleanor working the room. She spoke to my coworkers, asked pointed questions, and laughed in a way that felt rehearsed. She was gathering information, slowly, methodically. During the cake cutting, she clinked her glass for attention. I'd like to make a toast, she said, to Jason and Samantha. May your union bring you both prosperity, and may you always share your blessings as true partners. The tone was off, too pointed. Around the room, some guests looked puzzled. Jason shifted beside me, clearly uneasy. As the evening wound down, Eleanor approached us again, this time holding a sleek document folder. A little wedding gift, she said, handing it to Jason. Just some forms to review when you have a moment. No rush. Jason took the folder without a word. Thanks, Mom. Later, as we prepared to leave for the resort, I found a quiet moment with him. Your mom seems unusually interested in our finances, I said. Jason sighed. She's been like this since my dad left. Financial ruin scared her. She clings to money like a lifeline. But you don't have to worry. I'll talk to her. Promise me something, I said, turning to face him directly. Promise that no matter what, the choices we make will be ours, not hers. He looked at me seriously and kissed my forehead. I promise, you come first now, always. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. By the time we arrived at Lakeview Resort, it was after 11. We were tired, but wrapped in that blissful, surreal glow that follows a wedding. And yet, even as I held Jason's hand and leaned against him, I could feel the weight of the unopened folder in our luggage. Waiting, I stared at our suite's reflection in the mirror. Rose petals on the bed, the faint scent of lavender in the air. Everything arranged with care by the hotel staff. Jason was in the bathroom brushing his teeth, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I wanted to freeze this moment, to hold on to the belief that we were just another couple beginning our life together without hidden agendas or strategic documents tucked beside the toiletries. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking a tightrope between honesty and disaster. I would wait until the morning, I told myself again. Over breakfast, by the lake, when the pressure of the day had lifted, I'd tell him everything. The truth would either bring us closer or set the tone for a very different marriage than the one I had hoped for. I changed into my nightgown slowly, folding my wedding dress with reverence. As I slipped beneath the covers and Jason joined me, his arm wrapping comfortably around my waist, I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing and whispered to the ceiling. Please, let this love be enough. The lakeside cabin I had chosen for our honeymoon wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy and quiet, exactly what I wanted. Its rustic charm came with a stone fireplace, creaky wood floors, and panoramic windows that opened to the serene waters of the lake, where the moonlight shimmered like melted silver across the surface. This is perfect, Jason whispered, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we stood barefoot on the deck, our bodies pressed close. Just you and me. His breath warmed the back of my neck, and for a fleeting moment I let myself believe in the magic of this beginning. That night, as we consummated our marriage, I tried to silence every thought about Eleanor, legal documents, and corporate responsibilities. For those precious hours, there was no CEO, no hidden wealth, just Sam and Jason, two souls madly in love. The morning sun broke through the gauzy curtains of our cabin, scattering golden rays across the knotty pine walls. Jason stirred beside me, then pressed a kiss to my forehead. Good morning, Mrs. Miller, he murmured with a smile. Good morning, husband, I replied, the words still strange on my tongue but sweet. We had planned to spend 2 nights at the resort before heading back to real life. I'd decided the second night would be the time. After a long hike through the nearby woods, a quiet dinner in the resort's private dining area, I would tell Jason the truth about Harlow Technologies, the full scale of my inheritance, and why I had kept it hidden. After breakfast on the deck, a simple spread of coffee, fruit, and toasted bagels, we leaned into the stillness, soaking in the view. That's when Jason's phone buzzed. "It's Mom," he said, frowning. "She says there's a plumbing emergency at my apartment. Water everywhere. She says we need to come back right away." I blinked. "Can't she call a plumber herself?" "She says the super needs the tenant present." Jason was already grabbing his shoes, his tone apologetic. "I'm sorry, Sam. We'll just head back and return tonight. It shouldn't take long." My gut twisted. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. But arguing over a potential flood didn't feel wise. We packed and checked out, leaving the lake behind with promises to come back and finish what we'd started. The 40-minute drive passed in silence. As we neared Jason's apartment building, I noted the absence of any emergency vehicles or utility crews. "That's odd," I said. "You'd expect some sign of a major leak." Jason shrugged and checked his phone again. "She says she's upstairs." Inside, everything was normal. No wet floors, no scent of mildew, the air was undisturbed. And that's what I saw them. Eleanor sat on the sofa, perfectly composed in a tailored blazer. Beside her was a balding man in a suit, briefcase at his feet. A younger woman stood to the side with a notary seal in clear view on the coffee table. Legal documents were neatly stacked beside her. "What's going on?" I asked, cold dread rising. Eleanor turned, her expression serene. "Apologies for the deception. There's no plumbing emergency, but there is a matter of urgency, financial urgency." The man stood and extended his hand. "Curtis Dawson, attorney at law." "A pleasure, Mrs. Miller." I didn't take his hand. "Why are you here?" Eleanor's polite facade slipped, her voice sharper now. "This is about honesty, Samantha. Or perhaps I should call you the CEO of Harlow Technologies." My stomach clenched, Jason's face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor turned to him, her smile tight. "Your wife has been keeping secrets, Jason. She's not just managing investments. She owns an entire company, Harlow Technologies, valued at $25.6 million. She looked back at me, eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? I hired a private investigator the day you announced your engagement." The room tilted around me. I turned to Jason, but he was unreadable. "Is this true?" he asked softly. Before I could respond, Eleanor jumped in again. "Mr. Dawson has prepared the appropriate documents for transferring partial ownership of Harlow Technologies to Jason, as is customary for spouses. And Ms. Bradley here will notarize everything. You're married now. It's time to share assets properly." I found my voice. "You lured us back under pretenses to spring this ambush?" Curtis Dawson spoke smoothly. "It's not an ambush, Mrs. Miller. It's simply a marital property adjustment. 50% ownership, in line with standard division practices." I scoffed. "There is nothing standard about this. And this state doesn't operate on community property rules by default. My business was mine before marriage, and remains mine unless I choose otherwise." Jason sat down, rubbing his temples. I turned to him. "Did you know about this?" He hesitated, just long enough for the pain to creep into my chest. "I knew Mom had questions. She said she suspected you weren't being fully transparent." "I didn't know about this meeting." "Not exactly." "Not exactly," I repeated, stunned. "What does that mean?" "She mentioned she might look into it. I didn't realize she'd go this far." Eleanor interjected. "Jason and I agreed that transparency is vital in a marriage. You should have disclosed your financial holdings." I stared at Jason. "Is that true? Did you talk to your mother about getting access to my finances?" He looked ashamed. "I thought it was strange. You were vague about your job. Mom believed you were hiding something. I told her we should be open, but I never asked for this." "But you discussed it," I said flatly. He nodded reluctantly. "We talked." Eleanor stepped forward, pen in hand. "Enough of the drama. You concealed significant assets before marriage. Time to correct that mistake. Sign the documents, Samantha." I didn't move. My hands clenched at my sides. I stared at the stack of papers as if they were poison. "You can't be serious," I said, turning my full attention back to Eleanor. "You staged a fake emergency to manipulate me into signing away half of my company?" Eleanor gave a patronizing shrug. "Marriage is a partnership. Assets should be shared. I'm just helping facilitate what's fair." I took a step forward, my voice sharp and steady. "You're not facilitating fairness. You're orchestrating a theft under the guise of legality. And Jason?" I turned to him, forcing him to meet my gaze. You stood there and let this happen. You let her do this. Jason looked torn, his face ashen. I didn't know she was going to pull this today, I swear. I didn't agree to this. But you talked about it, I repeated, each word heavier than the last. You entertained the idea of taking what I built, and you didn't tell me. I thought we were supposed to share things, he mumbled. I didn't think you were hiding something so big. I shook my head, anger surging past the hurt. I wasn't hiding it to keep it from you. I was protecting myself, and clearly, I was right to do so. Curtis Dawson cleared his throat. If you'd like, I can walk you through the documentation. No, I snapped. This conversation is over. Eleanor's face hardened. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll see what the courts have to say about your financial deception. Prenuptial agreement or not, judges don't look kindly on hidden assets. I smiled, cold and unwavering. I have nothing to hide from the courts. My legal team has ensured that every step I've taken is above board. Try to contest it, you'll be buried in red tape before your attorney even finds the first loophole. I turned to the notary. You might want to pack up, you're not witnessing anything today. As Miss Bradley began awkwardly collecting her materials, Eleanor stood rigid with fury. Jason sat silently, avoiding my eyes. I need some air, I said finally, backing toward the door. Alone. And I walked out, the door clicking behind me, louder than any gavel. It's what's best for everyone, Eleanor said, her voice coated with false diplomacy. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Best for everyone, or just best for you, Eleanor? For the family, she insisted, lifting her chin. Jason deserves security after everything he's endured. And you think ripping half of Harlow Technologies from me provides that security? I asked, my voice low and measured. You're talking about the company my grandfather built from scratch. The legacy he entrusted to me. You want me to give that away like it means nothing? Curtis Dawson, the attorney, cleared his throat and interjected. Technically, the documents are structured to allocate 25% to Jason and another 25% into a family trust. The trust would provide shared financial benefits to both Jason and Mrs. Miller's immediate family. In this case, Eleanor. That's enough, I cut him off sharply. I turned back to Eleanor, eyes narrowed. Let's stop pretending this is about unity or transparency. You want control, half of a company that's none of your business. Let's call it what it is. The polished veneer cracked. Eleanor's mask slipped entirely. You owe it to this family, she snapped. Do you think I'd let my son marry someone who could walk away with millions while he gets left with nothing? That's not marriage. That's manipulation. Sign the papers. The notary, Miss Bradley, shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. Perhaps I should return another time, she murmured, reaching hesitantly for her stamp. Stay right there, Eleanor barked. We're resolving this today. I took a deep breath, grounding myself. My grandfather had taught me how to keep composure in a storm, how to face adversaries with a cool head when the room caught fire. I'm not signing anything, I said calmly but with finality. And Mr. Dawson, I recommend you do some proper due diligence next time. Had you researched Harlow Technologies more thoroughly, you'd know that my ownership is encased in multiple irrevocable trusts and protected by a fortress of legal structures. I met his startled eyes. What you're attempting isn't just ineffective, it's dangerously close to attempted fraud. Curtis Dawson paled, his posture stiffening. Mrs. Miller, I was told these were standard postnuptial agreements, initiated by mutual understanding. Well, you were misled, I replied, and if I were you, I'd reconsider your client's integrity before attaching your name to this circus. Eleanor's face twisted with rage. You can't do this, she spat. You deceived Jason, tricked him into a marriage under pretenses. That's rich coming from the woman who faked a plumbing emergency to lure me here, I said coldly, with a notary and a lawyer ready to pounce. I turned to Jason. He was frozen in the center of the room, pale and shaken, a silent figure in this staged ambush. And you? I asked quietly. Did you marry me knowing this was coming? Was this about money all along? No, Jason blurted, stepping forward. I swear, Sam. I didn't know about the company. Not until now. But you knew something, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You let her tell you I was hiding finances. You talked about me, about my money, like I was a vault, not a partner. Jason flinched. She said it was weird, how you never talked specifics. I just thought, I don't know. I thought we'd figure it out. After the wedding. I never asked for this. But you entertained the idea, I said, every syllable sharp. You discussed gaining access to what I've built. With her. Behind my back. Jason had no defense. He looked at the floor. I grabbed my purse from the floor and slung it over my shoulder. I need to leave. Eleanor moved toward me, urgency flickering in her eyes. If you walk out that door without signing those papers, you'll regret it. I paused, turned back and looked her in the eye. Is that a threat? It's a promise, she hissed. I'll tell everyone that you conned Jason into marrying you, that you're a liar who hid millions from her husband. I smiled, cold and unflinching. And I'll tell everyone how you tried to coerce your daughter-in-law into signing over corporate assets the day after her wedding. Which of those stories do you think will play better in court, in the media? Eleanor's mouth opened, but no words came. I turned to Jason one last time. His face was a blend of shock, confusion, and something that looked like regret. I thought you were different, I said softly. I thought what we had was real. And then I walked out. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing like a gavel. I drove aimlessly, the city blurring past in streaks of gray and gold as twilight set in. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself in front of Katie's apartment. She opened the door before I even knocked, read my face in a heartbeat, and pulled me into her arms. What happened? She asked, as we sat on her couch. You're supposed to be on your honeymoon. Through sobs and stammered breaths, I told her everything. The fake plumbing emergency, the notary, the documents, Jason's silence. Katie didn't speak until I finished. Then she exploded. That manipulative witch? And Jason? How could he just stand there? I don't know what to do, I admitted, gripping the wine glass she placed in my hands. I'm legally married to someone who conspired, at best passively, with his mother to take over my company. Katie's eyes narrowed. You need to call Frank, now. She was right. My grandfather's lawyer, Frank Thompson, had been my rock since his passing. I dialed him, and he picked up on the second ring. Samantha, he said, his voice firm but warm. Tell me everything. And I did. When I finished, his response was swift. Come to my office first thing in the morning. Do not call or text either of them. Don't respond to voicemails. We'll sort this out. His voice softened. Your grandfather would be proud of you. You did everything right. That night, I curled up in Katie's guest room. My wedding ring felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I slipped it off and set it on the nightstand, staring at it for a long while before turning off the light. My phone buzzed. Jason. Voicemail number 9. I didn't listen. By morning, I was in Frank's office. He greeted me like family. At 72, he still possessed the sharp mind of a corporate strategist and the comforting presence of the grandfather I had lost. Let's protect what's yours, he said. And I nodded, ready to do just that. As Frank sifted through my notes and recounted the legal protections already in place, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't just about a company anymore. It was about standing up for the values my grandfather had instilled in me: diligence, boundaries, and courage in the face of exploitation. Do you want to pursue annulment? Frank asked gently. I hadn't thought that far ahead. The emotional whiplash of the last 24 hours made it hard to see the road in front of me, but one thing was clear. Trust had been broken in ways that couldn't be patched overnight, if ever. I don't know, I admitted, but I want to make sure. Eleanor can't ever pull something like this again. Frank nodded. Then let's start there. That afternoon, as the city buzzed outside Frank's high-rise office, I began drafting a new chapter of my life, not one defined by betrayal, but by resilience, by strength, by the legacy of a man who taught me never to let anyone take what I'd earned without a fight. And I was ready. Frank leaned forward in his chair, the morning sun casting slanted shadows across the rich walnut desk. First, let me assure you, Samantha, he said, your company is entirely secure. The irrevocable trusts we established before your wedding are airtight. No one, not even a spouse, can claim ownership or rights to Harlow Technologies without your specific, documented consent through clearly defined legal mechanisms. A wave of relief swept through me, loosening a knot in my stomach that had coiled tighter with every passing hour. So Eleanor's documents were meaningless. Worse than meaningless, Frank said grimly. They were a blatant attempt at coercion. Depending on how far you want to take it, what she orchestrated could be grounds for civil litigation. Possibly even criminal fraud, given the pretense of a fake emergency and ambush tactics. I don't want to drag this through the courts, I said quickly. I just want this nightmare behind me. He nodded slowly. Understood. Let's focus on your next steps regarding the marriage itself. You have options, none pleasant, I'm afraid, but each with a path forward. Frank outlined them methodically. annulment on the grounds of fraud if I could demonstrate that Jason entered the marriage with the intent of accessing my assets. Divorce, which, though messier, would be relatively straightforward given the brief duration of the marriage. Or, the most uncertain path, reconciliation, with clearly defined legal boundaries and a complete overhaul of trust. "What would you do?" I asked, voice soft, "if your daughter were in my position?" Frank removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. "I'd want her to be absolutely certain of Jason's role in this. If he was knowingly complicit, then I'd advise immediate separation. But if he was manipulated by his mother, it's a different conversation." "Mentions knew something," I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "He admitted they discussed my finances." "Many couples discuss finances before marriage," Frank said gently. "The key question is intent. Was he part of a deliberate plan to deceive you, or was he a pawn in Eleanor's game? Only you can answer that." I left Frank's office resolved to take a short leave from Harlow Technologies. My assistant was informed only that my honeymoon had been extended for personal reasons. No details, no speculation. Back at Katie's apartment, I found a trio of packages waiting by the door. Flowers, a handwritten letter, a small box, all from Jason. The bouquet was white lilies, my favorite. The note was 8 pages long, carefully written in Jason's slanted handwriting. I sat at the dining table and read it twice, searching for authenticity in his words, trying to separate remorse from strategic apology. "Mom has always been obsessed with financial stability," he wrote. "After she met you, she became convinced you were hiding something. She thought you might be in debt, that maybe you were embarrassed to talk about it. I didn't push back hard enough. I should have. I see that now." He claimed he had no knowledge of the notary or of the documents, said he thought the plumbing emergency was real, that he'd only agreed to discuss finances after the wedding, and that Eleanor had blindsided him as much as she had me. The package contained his copy of our marriage certificate and a key to his apartment, small symbolic gestures meant to show vulnerability, to hand over control. Katie stood beside me, scanning the letter. "Well," she said dryly, "that's convenient. Everything's his mother's fault again." "What if he's telling the truth?" I asked. "What if he really is just stuck between a controlling mother and a wife who no longer trusts him?" "There's one way to find out," Katie said. "Talk to him, on your terms, not his, and certainly not Eleanor's." After 3 days of soul-searching, I texted Jason. "We need to talk. Bring your mother. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Thompson Legal Offices downtown. This is non-negotiable." His response came within minutes. "We'll be there. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation we'd had over the past year, every affectionate gesture, every time he'd smiled at me over coffee or held my hand during our hikes. Had I missed the signs? Had I seen only what I wanted to see? The next morning, Frank and I prepared for the meeting. "I need clarity," I told him. "No more gray areas. I want to know where I stand legally and personally." "You're in a position of strength," Frank reminded me. "They have no leverage, except your feelings." At precisely 2 p.m., Jason and Eleanor entered the conference room. Jason looked exhausted, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept since the wedding. Eleanor, by contrast, was polished to perfection, though the tight set of her jaw betrayed her disapproval. Frank introduced himself, his tone professional and unyielding. Eleanor arched a brow. "You already had a lawyer waiting to ambush us?" "Given that you orchestrated a legal ambush against my client the day after her wedding," Frank said, "I'd suggest you reconsider your definition of ambush." Eleanor flushed but said nothing. Jason hadn't taken his eyes off me. "Sam," he began, voice raw, "I can't tell you how sorry—" I raised a hand. "Before anyone speaks, I want full honesty. I'm going to lay out my side, and I expect the same from both of you." They nodded. "I own Harlow Technologies," I said, my voice steady. "My grandfather left it to me 3 years ago. It's valued at over $25 million, 0 cents, and I serve as CEO. I kept this private, not because I don't trust people, but because he taught me to be cautious, especially about love and money." I turned to Eleanor. It turns out, he was right. "If you'd been honest from the beginning," she began, but Jason interrupted her. Mom, no, just stop." He looked back at me. "Sam, I swear, I had no idea. I didn't know about the company. I didn't even know you were wealthy. All I knew was what Mom kept implying, that you were secretive about your job and maybe in debt or hiding something embarrassing. I never imagined this." Eleanor scoffed. "We discussed her secrecy many times, Jason. I warned you." You said she might be struggling financially, Jason countered. You never once said she might own a multi-million-dollar company. You led me to believe she needed help, not that we were about to pull off a hostile takeover. Eleanor's mouth tightened. Well, I wasn't entirely wrong, was I? Look where we are. Jason turned back to me. Sam, I didn't know. And if I had, I never would have let her do what she did. And for a moment, just a flicker, I almost believed him. But belief wasn't the same as trust. Not anymore. I appreciate your words, Jason, I said quietly. But this isn't just about saying the right thing. It's about rebuilding what was broken. You'll need to decide where your loyalty truly lies. Because from this point forward, I won't allow Eleanor to have any influence over our lives or our marriage. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but I stood up. No more manipulation, no more triangulating through Jason. If either of you wants to stay in my life, it will be on my terms, with absolute honesty, complete transparency, and zero tolerance for deceit. Frank stood beside me, his presence a silent affirmation of everything I had just declared. This meeting is over, I said. And I walked out, head held high, determined to reclaim not just my business, but my boundaries, my future, and my peace. Whatever came next, it would be my decision. Their heated exchange revealed more than just frustration. It exposed the underlying dysfunction that had shaped Jason's life and now threatened to unravel mine. As they bickered across the conference table, Frank discreetly slid a note toward me, his expression unreadable. I glanced down. This appears genuine. He seems as blindsided as you were. It was the validation I needed, but it didn't dull the sting. I sat forward, my voice calm but firm. Stop. The word cut through the air like a blade. Both Jason and Eleanor fell silent. I turned my gaze on her. I have one question, Eleanor. Why? Why go to such extreme lengths to gain access to my company? For the briefest moment, Eleanor's perfectly poised expression cracked. Behind the carefully arranged lines of her face, I caught a flash of something raw and vulnerable. Desperation. I was protecting my son, she said eventually. Her tone was defensive, but her voice trembled ever so slightly. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't being taken advantage of. By orchestrating a scheme to take half my company, I asked, incredulous. That's not protection, Eleanor. That's premeditated theft. You don't understand, she said, her facade starting to crumble. When Jason's father left, he took everything. I was left with a young son and nothing but a mountain of debt. I worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed. I swore Jason would never feel that kind of financial insecurity again. Jason's face paled. Mom, what aren't you telling us? She hesitated, then looked at her hands. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm in debt. A lot of it. Medical bills from my cancer treatment 5 years ago. Insurance didn't cover as much as I claimed. And I took out a second mortgage to help pay your student loans. Jason's eyes widened. You told me it was covered, and I've been sending you payments every month. Not enough, she said, her voice tight. The interest keeps compounding. It's unmanageable. When I found out about Samantha's company, I saw a solution. A way out. The room fell into a heavy silence. The truth had finally emerged, not just about Eleanor's financial mess, but her real motivation. She hadn't been trying to secure Jason's future. She had been trying to rescue herself. How much? I asked quietly. She blinked. What? How much debt, Eleanor? I want to know the number. She hesitated, then spoke a figure aloud that made Jason gasp. It was staggering for someone on a fixed income. Enough to bury someone like Eleanor. But to me, it was a tiny fraction of what Harlow Technologies earned annually. So this wasn't about Jason at all, I said. This was about using me, using my company. You were looking for a bailout, not a family. Eleanor had no retort. Her silence confirmed the truth of my words. I turned to Jason. He looked shattered, his world tilting on its axis. His mother's carefully crafted narrative of martyrdom and protection had just fallen apart in front of him. I need to know where you stand, Jason, I said, not just about this situation, but about us, about our marriage, our future, if there is one. He met my eyes, and in that moment, I saw something break free in him. I love you, Sam. I married you because I love you, not for your company, not for your money. I'm sick over what happened. I can't take it back, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you'll let me. Then he turned to Eleanor. But Mom, you crossed every line. What you did, it was wrong. And if Sam gives me another chance, you need to understand something. She is my priority now. Not your debts, not your fears, her. Eleanor's face crumpled under the weight of her son's words. Years, no, decades, of codependence challenged in a single moment. She had always been the sun in Jason's orbit, and now she was being eclipsed. The choice before me wasn't simple. Walk away from a man I had loved deeply because of the toxic entanglement he shared with his mother, or try to salvage something from the wreckage of betrayal. Could I rebuild trust on a foundation that had already been cracked? I need time, I said finally. This isn't a decision I can make today. Jason nodded. Eleanor simply stared at the table. As we stood to leave, Eleanor reached out to me. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. For what it's worth, I am sorry, not just for being caught, but for what I tried to do. Desperation makes people do terrible things. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. Over the next 2 weeks, I returned to my loft. I resumed work at Harlow Technologies, throwing myself into strategy meetings and product reviews, trying to reclaim the sense of control that had been stripped from me. Jason and I exchanged sporadic messages, carefully worded, cautious. Neither of us ready to talk about us, just yet. Surprisingly, Eleanor kept her distance. According to Jason, she had admitted herself to credit counseling and had begun working with a financial advisor to manage her debts. Even more shockingly, she was seeing a therapist, a woman who specialized in financial trauma, something Eleanor had previously mocked as emotional nonsense. She's changing, Jason told me one night over the phone, or trying to. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in change, in second chances. But the memory of that morning, the notary, the folder, Eleanor's smug insistence still haunted me. Then, one evening, Frank called with an unexpected update. Samantha, he said, Eleanor Miller has requested another meeting, this time with both you and Jason present, and both legal representatives. Why? I asked. I was exhausted. What could she possibly have left to say? She didn't give details, Frank replied. Only that it was important, and that it would be worth your time. Against my better judgment, and Katie's emphatic objections, I agreed. The next afternoon, we gathered again in Frank's conference room. This time, Eleanor entered not alone, but accompanied by a woman with kind eyes and a calm, measured demeanor. Patricia Walton, she introduced herself, offering a professional nod. I'm a licensed family therapist, specializing in financial trauma and recovery. Eleanor took her seat across from me. The fire and arrogance were gone. In their place, a quiet humility. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she began. Her voice was subdued, her tone genuine. I've spent the last few weeks doing some difficult, uncomfortable work. Patricia's helped me realize just how deep my fear of scarcity runs. After Jason's father left, I became obsessed with control, with protecting what little I had. That obsession, it poisoned my judgment. She placed a slim folder on the table, but made no move to open it. I want to apologize. Not to excuse what I did, but to own it. I violated your privacy. I betrayed your trust. I tried to manipulate both you and Jason for my own gain. I was wrong. I said nothing. I needed to hear the rest. Patricia helped me understand that I've been repeating the same pattern for decades, trying to buy control, trying to preempt abandonment. And I see now that I nearly destroyed my relationship with my son, and any chance he had at a real future with someone who truly loves him. Jason watched his mother with wary eyes, hope and hurt vying for dominance. And I wasn't sure what I felt yet, but I was listening. This vulnerable version of Eleanor was clearly new to him too. The truth is, Eleanor said, opening the folder, I came today to offer you this. She slid a document across the table toward me. It was a notarized legal statement, formal, airtight, and witnessed, declaring she held no claim or interest in Harlow Technologies or any of my personal assets, now or in the future. I also want you to have this, she added, pushing forward a sealed envelope. It's a full accounting of my financial situation. Debts, accounts, every dollar owed, complete transparency. Frank took the documents and reviewed them with the precision I had come to rely on. After a few minutes, he nodded toward me, his eyes calm. They appeared legitimate. I looked at Elena. Why the change of heart? She glanced at Patricia, the therapist beside her, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Because I realized I was about to lose my son, Eleanor admitted, her voice breaking at the edges. And no amount of money is worth that. Jason reached across the table and gently took her hand, a gesture of compassion that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. There's something else you should know, she continued. After our last meeting, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and financial PTSD. It doesn't excuse what I did, but it helps explain it. I'm on medication now. I'm going to therapy. I'm doing the work. I studied her face for signs of manipulation, a performance, but for the first time, I didn't see it. What I saw instead was vulnerability, raw, unpolished, and startlingly human. I appreciate your apology, I said carefully, and these documents, they are a meaningful first step, but trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand, Eleanor replied without defensiveness. I don't expect forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. I just wanted to take responsibility and start making amends. Jason cleared his throat. Sam, I know my relationship with Mom has been unhealthy. I enabled her behavior for years without realizing it. That's changing now. I've put boundaries in place, but I understand if it's too late for us. The air in the room felt heavy with honesty. This wasn't the cold, calculated Eleanor who ambushed me with a notary, and Jason wasn't the man who stood silently by while it happened. Something had shifted in both of them. What are you asking for? I asked, my voice even. A chance, Jason said simply, not to go back. We can't undo the past, but a chance to try again, with healthier boundaries and full transparency. Eleanor nodded slowly. And I'm asking for the opportunity to earn back some measure of respect. Even if trust isn't possible yet, I'll continue therapy. I'll stay out of your financial lives completely. I promise. Frank passed me a note. Their actions match their words so far. Your decision. I took a long breath. Eleanor, thank you for the apology and for these documents. They mean a lot, but my relationship with Jason is separate from my relationship with you. If there's any hope of rebuilding that, we start from scratch. She nodded, accepting that boundary. I turned to Jason, and you and I, we have a long road ahead. If this marriage is going to survive, we need rules. Clear ones. Anything, he said quickly, whatever you need. I want couples therapy. I want a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Frank. I want us living separately for at least 3 more months while we figure this out. And I want a complete moratorium on Eleanor being involved in any financial matters. None. 0. Jason nodded solemnly. And one more thing, I added, meeting his eyes. I need you to understand my company. Truly understand it. Harlow Technologies isn't just numbers and patents. It's a legacy. It's my family's life work. If we're going to have a future, you need to see that part of me. Jason didn't hesitate. Then that's what I'll do. To Eleanor's credit, she supported every term and excused herself from the room while Jason and I discussed our next steps privately. As the meeting ended, a cautious sense of hope bloomed in my chest. Not peace, not certainty, but hope. Eleanor paused at the door before leaving. Samantha, she said, your grandfather was right to protect his legacy so carefully, and he was right to entrust it to you. I didn't see it before, but I do now. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. 6 months later, Jason and I found ourselves seated across from Dr. Marlene Foster, our couples therapist, the same woman who had patiently guided us through the fallout from Eleanor's deception. This is your 20th session, she said, glancing at her notes. How would each of you describe your progress? Jason looked at me, I looked back, and for the first time, we smiled in tandem. It's been the hardest 6 months of my life, I admitted, but also the most transformative. Jason nodded. We had to rebuild everything from scratch: trust, communication, emotional safety. Some days, it felt impossible. Foster didn't speak, just waited. For the first 3 months, I continued, we lived separately. We each had our own therapy. We did couples counseling twice a week, family therapy too. When Eleanor joined us, it was intense. It was messy. Jason added, but it was necessary. That distance gave us clarity, structure, space to grieve and forgive. The post-nuptial agreement Frank had drafted had been signed without incident. It protected Harlow Technologies unequivocally, but it also outlined fair, clear terms for our shared marital property. There were no hidden clauses, no ambiguity, just clean, mutual agreement. Eleanor had kept her promise. She maintained strict boundaries. She remained in therapy and credit counseling. According to Jason, she had even started helping other women navigate financial trauma by sharing her story. A quiet redemption in the background. The breakthrough, I said, came when Jason started understanding what Harlow Technologies truly means. Not just the money, the mission. 2 months into our separation, I invited Jason to the company headquarters, not as a spouse or observer, but as a participant. I introduced him to the people I had mentored, to the engineers who'd been hired by my grandfather, and to the interns we supported through community programs. He shadowed every department, from software engineering to PR. He sat in on our cybersecurity symposium. He helped coordinate our scholarship fund event. He even handled customer service calls for a day. And that somehow changed everything. "It's not just a company," he said one night, exhausted and exhilarated. "It's a family, a legacy." That was when I knew we weren't going backward, we were building something new. It would never be simple. There would be more hard conversations, more therapy, more vigilance. But for the first time in a long time, I could see a future I wanted. One built not on illusions or entitlement, but on honesty and earned trust. Whatever came next, we would face it side by side.